this. One is because what I'm going to read today is going to be multiple versions of the Bible. It's not going to just be one version, okay? I kind of tried to pick out some of the best versions, interpretations of that verse that I thought would fit maybe to understand. So you can go back and read it in your King James Version, your CSB, NIV, NLT, ASV, EVS, VBS, TRQ, whatever version that you have. And you can go back, because when you begin to read the book of Revelation, if you were with us last week as we were going through here, a lot of people have problems with it because the book of Revelation has certain things in it. Some of those things that you have in the book of Revelation is this. It has a lot of prophecy, but it also has a lot of puzzles. And sometimes what happens is we see the pictures or we see the pieces of the puzzle, but we can't piece them all together. Some of these are events that have already occurred, but they had not occurred at the time that John was writing the stuff down that Jesus was telling him about. Some of these things are going to occur in the lifetime of John. Because remember, John was one of the disciples, was the only disciple that was not murdered. He was allowed to live for a while. And one of the things that happened in 70 AD that Jesus had prophesied, he told John that this was going to happen in your generation that you're in. And before your generation passes away, you are going to see this happen. And so, even though the book of Revelation is prophecy, it's not just prophecy that has not occurred already. It was prophecy of things that were going to occur from the time that Jesus was talking to John, and John had not died yet, that John was going to experience in just a few years. And so we'll kind of walk through these things. Again, I told you last week that what happens in the book of Revelation, when you begin to read it, you end up getting a Charlie horse between your ears, because it's very complicated. And sometimes we make it more complicated than what it is, because Revelation is written in a completely different manner than all of the other books of the Bible. The book of Revelation is written in what is called apocalyptic prophecy, which means, again, we use the word apocalyptic and we use the word apocalypse. As you know, apocalypse is a big event. A lot of times they look at a big event, apocalypse, as something that is bad, and not necessarily. It's just a major event that is going to occur, or a major event that is going to happen. But when you read the book of Revelation, you need to understand something, and that is in the very first chapter, Jesus says this: "Blessed is the one who will read this book." That doesn't mean for us to stay away from it. That means for us to read it and embrace it. Because when you read it, you get blessed by some of the stuff that is going to be here. And it was not written to be a book to be afraid of. It was intended to be a book for blessing for the children of God. And sometimes we're so afraid of it that we miss the blessing that is there. We'll discuss differences of opinion. That's fine. Because those differences of opinion will still bless us in many ways. for things that we see coming, things that we've already seen happened, that Jesus had prophesied, had promised, which allows us to also understand that everything that Jesus has promised, ladies and gentlemen, he has already kept his word. And if he has already kept his word, he is not going to change his attitude or his structure and change what he's already said, and it's not going to happen. A lot of times people think, well, we'll stop it from occurring. No, you can't. You and I cannot stop it. What we can do is embrace it and help other people to understand it is coming, and to be ready for that event. So one of the things we talked about last week, again, we talked about Revelation chapter 1 and verse number 3, where he basically says that, right in the opening, he says, God blesses the one who reads the words of this prophecy to the church, and he blesses all who listens to its message and obeys what it says. So what he's saying is this: blessed is the one who reads the word, or the messenger. A lot of times the preacher, the pastor, the one who reads it, and also blessed are the ones who listen to the reading of the word. It's not just in the book of Revelation, ladies and gentlemen. That is why we read the scriptures. It's because I get blessed reading, you get blessed hearing, and we all get blessed together. Just from the word itself, okay? But we began to set it up last week with just 3 points, and let me go back real quickly to get them. And that is this: when you need to unlock the keys to the book of Revelation, you need to understand 3 things. Number 1 is the setting. When you look at the book of Revelation, ladies and gentlemen, it was written to the 7 churches of Asia. Okay? And these were 7 historical churches. And they were during this period of time of the Roman Empire. Keep this in mind. Okay? Because it's very important in understanding the rest of these things. They were churches that had been established after Jesus had gone and resurrected. His disciples had gone from place to place and setting up churches. And when they went into town, they set up a church. It was not a Baptist church, a Pentecostal church, a Methodist church, a Lutheran church. If I could use this, it was a church of God, okay? It's not a denomination. But it was called the Church of Smyrna. It was called the Church of Ephesus. It was called the Church of Laodicea. It was for the whole town. It was for neighbors to come together, to learn from one another, to hear the word, and to embrace that fellowship together. Because why? They were under the rule of the Roman Empire. They were being persecuted. And Jesus was trying to tell them, I'm trying to help you out. So the setting was there. The style, we've already talked about it. It was unique. It was known as apocalyptic literature. And it has figurative language. Okay? But it also has some fantasy things that they imagine. John is trying his best to describe what he's seeing. And there are things that he's never seen before. And it's just like you and I. Have you ever tried to describe a sunset to someone who's not there? Have you ever just tried to describe to someone how much you love them? And the words just don't flow. You don't want to tell them that you love them more than a puppy dog, okay? Or you don't want to tell them that you remind them of your mutt. You know, there are certain words in the description that you want to be very, very careful about. But when you see a beautiful sight and someone's not there and you're trying your best to describe what you're seeing, you try to do your best to describe the figures that are there. And so he'll do this. And then the last one is some of the symbolisms that he uses. Again, the beast, the battles, and the other things that are untold. But yet you need to understand that these are going to be real people, real events, not something that Jesus dreamed up for John to see. He is trying to show John exactly what's going to occur. Again, some soon, some later, okay? That is there. So, when we begin to look at John chapter 1, there's three things that we're going to try to share with you this morning. And again, I've laid them out kind of in your Bible verses that are there. And the first one is something that we are going to celebrate in just a little bit. Matter of fact, next month, in a little over a month. We call it Christmas. But another name for Christmas is also called Advent. Advent means the coming, okay? And so what Jesus is trying to describe in chapter 1, first of all, is the Advent. And so many times when we look at this, we want to look at this as a future event, okay? And Jesus is trying to describe to John exactly what's happening now and what's going to happen in just a little bit of time when he dies, okay? And there are some people that want to use this, and I'm going to use scripture to show you where it's already occurred in the scriptures, that Jesus had given someone else a vision of what Jesus is describing that is going to occur in just a little while. Okay? So when you begin to look in the book of John or Revelation chapter 1, you begin to start reading in the very beginning of that book, Jesus is starting to make some brief greetings and some comments. And then the very next thing he does in verse number 3, he said, or in verse number 7, he says, "Behold, he is coming with the clouds, and every eye will see him, even those who pierced him, and all the tribes of the earth will mourn over him. So it is to be. Amen." Jesus is talking. Look at what he said. He said in verse number 7, "Behold, he is coming with the clouds." Now, a lot of times when we look at Jesus coming with the clouds, we think of his second coming. This is not talking about his second coming that we reference. This is talking about real soon. Look at what he said. "Behold," he says, "he is coming with the clouds, and every eye will see him, even those who pierced him." The generation that pierced Jesus Christ, they are still going to be alive, and they are going to see him coming in their lifetime. And I'll show you the vision that Jesus gave to someone, and was a prophecy that was fulfilled, what he's talking about here. Okay, so don't get worried. Because it says, "And all the tribes of the earth will mourn over him, so it is to be." So when you begin to look at this, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, this verse is central to the whole theme of the book of Revelation. It's about his coming. And he's describing these comings, okay? of what they are to be. So, when you deal with what is called, again, apocalyptic visions, you need to understand that things aren't always the way they appear. Okay? Just as when you look at in the scripture later on, it's going to be a seven-headed beast. And when you read about it, it represents a succession of 6 kings in Israel, and then the 7th one is going to be a prostitute. And you'll begin to see what is going on. Some people want to also use this as the 7 churches or the 7 layers of the church, with the last one being the succession of the prostitute. And what is a prostitute? It is a one who sells their body for pleasure or for something else. And the church of Laodicea was basically accused of being a prostitute. Today, I believe we are living in that age in which the church has sold itself out. If you want to use the word prostitution, it's a prostitution, because they have sold themselves out to the world, saying, got to have everything that the world has to offer outside, inside. And this is why the church is decaying. This is why the church no longer has the appeal that it once had. Their standards have been lowered. And God is telling us that this succession that is going to happen. So John begins to telling us, again, that this is a revelation from Jesus Christ, which God gave to him to show his servants the events that must soon take place. Again, please understand, some of these are going to take place during the time of John. Other events are going to happen later. Okay? And you got to know the difference. So, when you begin to look, he also says that blessed are those who listen to its message and obeys what it says, for the time is near. What we need to understand, and that is this: we need to begin, ladies and gentlemen, to start obeying what the scriptures says. Because we don't know when time is going to be called. We need to live our life like the Christians of the first century in the book, when they were looking every day for Jesus to come again. We've got so many people that want to pinpoint the date and the time. And ladies and gentlemen, if you can pinpoint the day and the time, you know more than Christ does. Because Christ even said, no man knoweth the day nor the hour in which the Son of Man shall appear. Not even the Son of Man, not even me. Only my Father who is in heaven knows the date or time. So we need to quit worrying and being concerned about when is Jesus coming. And we need to be more concerned about Jesus could come back the next second, the next moment of time, so that we are prepared for what's going to happen. But not just us prepared, we need to get the people that we're talking to prepared. Because today, you think about it, on Tuesday we had an election, and what's everybody saying? You have some that are saying, don't worry about it, he's only going to be in there 4 years. We don't even know if he's going to make it 4 years. Somebody might assassinate him. Jesus may come again. We don't know. I can't guarantee you that you and I are going to be living in 4 years. I can't guarantee you that the Lord doesn't come back in less than 4 years. Our life, ladies and gentlemen, need to be to a point where what we are doing is looking for Jesus to come back any moment and any second, and be prepared for it, and to help prepare the others that are there. So Jesus, when they were looking at this events to happen, you need to understand something. That some of these events, they were expecting to happen in that century. Okay? Not 20 centuries later. And some of them still have not happened. They may not happen for another 20 centuries. We don't know. What we need to think about is now. Why? Because our destiny in our future is not based upon events to happen later. Our destiny in our future is based upon events that happen right now in our life, whether you know Christ or not. And if you know Christ, then let me say this to you. If it doesn't happen in your lifetime, hey, we go home and wait. And guess what? It may be another 2,000 years. But you know what? 2,000 years with God is nothing. Just like a second in time. So when we begin to come to Jesus, and remember in verse number 7 where it says he's coming on the clouds? I've given you the verses that are there. They are found in Daniel chapter 7, verses 13 and 14. And it says, I continued watching in the night visions, and suddenly one like the Son of Man was coming with the clouds of heaven. He approached the Ancients of Days and was escorted before him. Verse number 14, he was given dominion, glory, and a kingdom, so that those of every people, nation, and language should serve him. Now look at this. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that will not pass away, and his kingdom is one that he says will not be destroyed. So when you look at this, you'll begin to see that in the book of Daniel, there is also some apocalyptic visions that are given. One is given to Nebuchadnezzar, and he dreams about a statue with a golden head, a silver chest, a bronze belly, and iron legs. Daniel takes this vision that Nebuchadnezzar is talking about, and he gives it, and it represents 4 different successive kingdoms that had risen and now fallen. Okay? You would find, if you look in history, the Babylonian Empire, the Medo-Persian Empire. Then there was the Greek Empire. And finally, there was the Roman Empire. These 4 came and they all fell. And what he was trying to explain, that it is during the 4th reign of the kingdom, which was the Roman kingdom, that God would establish the kingdom, his kingdom on earth, which was Jesus. So when he starts talking about this, he's talking about an event that Daniel had not seen yet. Okay? And so he explains that it's during the reign of this 4th one that this was going to happen. So Daniel was beginning to look and see these things, and again, he began to start seeing these series of bizarre beasts and everything, okay? And they were kind of like the beasts that are found in the book of Revelation, okay? And so what Daniel was seeing a vision coming to play in part soon. But Daniel wasn't going to be there when it occurred. Okay? So he begins to tell us this. So what did Daniel witness? He witnessed Jesus, the Son of Man, coming on the clouds during the fourth kingdom, the Roman Empire. But here's what was told to Daniel. Daniel was told in Daniel chapter 8 and verse number 26 to seal up the vision, for it concerns the distant future. But in Revelation chapter 22 and verse number 10, look at what Jesus said to John. Don't seal up the words of the prophecy of this book, because the time is near. Daniel was told, seal it. John, leave it open. Don't hide it, because it's near. And so when you begin to look for understanding what Jesus is saying, the time is near, let's give you some verses. When you begin to look in Matthew chapter 24 in verse number 2. I know I didn't write them down up there. But he says this, when all these happen, or when all these things happen, and what will be the sign that they are about to take place? He says, listen, he says, do you see all these things? Truly I tell you, not one stone here will be left on another. Every one will be thrown down. Remember, they were talking about the temple. And what did Jesus say? He said, not one stone is going. He replied, do you see all these things? Truly I tell you, not one stone will be left here on another that will not be thrown down. He was talking about the destruction of the temple. When did that occur? 70 AD. It was a future event from that time that he was speaking, but it was an event that was going to happen in the lifetime of John and his generation. It was not something that's going to happen way in the future. He's saying it's going to happen, and it did. He's telling us the prophecies that are there. And then in Luke chapter 21, in verse number 7, 21:7, he goes on and he says, teacher, they ask him, so when will these things happen? And what will be the sign when these things are about to take place? And he begins to try to tell them all of these things that are going to happen. He says, if you go on down to Luke chapter 21 and verse number 20, that Jerusalem would be surrounded by armies. In Luke 21:24, there would be a great distress, and many would fall by the sword, and that Jerusalem would be trampled by the Gentiles. Then Jesus goes on and quotes Daniel, and here's what he says in Matthew chapter 24. Or no, give me Luke 21:24. You got it? Then they will be killed by the sword, and they be held captive captive into all the nations. Jerusalem will be trampled by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. And then you go over into Matthew chapter 24 and verse number 30. Did you find it? Okay. Then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in the sky. And then the peoples of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and glory. And so we look at this a lot of times as a future event. But go down to verse number 34. And look at what he says in 4:34. Truly, I tell you, this generation will certainly not pass away until all these things take place. So many times what we're doing is we're looking for these other events to occur. They already happened. When you begin to look at the scriptures, he's telling you this generation will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds. They saw him. Okay? The Mount Transfiguration. Okay? So what did he do? He told Daniel, this is what's going to happen. And in Matthew chapter 24, he is prophesying that this is going to happen within the time frame of that generation. So the prophecy that he gave to Daniel in Daniel chapter 7, what he told was going to happen is now happening during their generation. So when you begin to start putting these things together, you begin to start seeing these things that are happening. So we need to understand something. So many times what we want to do is we want to picture this Jesus coming in the clouds as a one-time event. And what has already occurred, but it will happen again. That generation saw it. Whatever generation is alive at the time is going to see it. Okay? And so when you begin to look at this, for John, it said, this was going to be the second one. But when he started talking about that this was a symbolic imagery of Jesus coming, that the 12 tribes were going to be destroyed with the temple. What's going to happen is the temple is going away and they're scattering because they no longer have a place to worship. And this is what he began to start talking about. And again, this happened when? AD 70. You can read the scriptures. You can read the history of Josephus and Philo. They will tell you, they were Greek historians or Jewish historians that will tell you historically these events occurred. Okay? Now, when you begin to understand this, you begin to start seeing now the persecution of the Jewish people are really starting. They destroyed everything. So now we go from the Advent to the activity. And so what Jesus speaks to John, he says, listen, in Revelation chapter 1, verses 12 through 16, he speaks to him and he tells John to write in a book everything that he's about to see. And John says, when I turned to see who was speaking to me, I saw 7 gold lampstands. Standing in the middle of the lampstands was someone like the Son of Man. He held 7 stars in his right hand. A little while later, Jesus tells John, here is the secret of the 7 stars that you saw in the right hand and the 7 golden candlesticks. The 7 lampstands are the 7 churches. The 7 stars are the angels of the 7 churches. The angels of the 7 churches were not literal angels. Okay, they were not these angels that are described later on. They were basically the messengers that were standing in the church, basically the pastors, the leaders of the church. They were the messenger. Who am I, ladies and gentlemen? I am a messenger to this congregation, to this church. My job is to give you the message that God gives to me, to tell you. And he talks about later on he'll talk about taking out the lampstand. and the churches are gone, okay? So what he begins to start seeing is a vision of an image of an angel. And when we began to see the angel, it was trying to give us something of calmness and assurance, not to be afraid of. So when you come in here on Sunday morning, don't be afraid of what I got to say. I'll try to calm you down. Sometimes. Okay? But then, when you begin to start looking, again, he starts talking about a couple places, the message to the Smyrna, Pergamum, and Philadelphia, because they really needed to hear that Smyrna was enthusiastically Roman, and in AD 26, they built a home for a statue. And we talked about this. And it was basically there for one reason only: emperor worship. And you think about it today, we say we don't worship an emperor. No, but we do worship other gods. Some people say, what are you talking about? Our jobs? Our kids? Our this? Our that? They hold more precedence. And God says this, ladies and gentlemen. If you and I put our relationship between us and God, again with Jesus, okay, with Jesus into God, if we put that relationship together properly the way it should be, our other relationships will start falling into place. But when our relationship between us and God gets out of whack, it goes out the other way, that it will also be out of whack with one another. And so many times we try to figure out, why is everybody fighting against each other? Reason? Our perpendicular relationship with God is out of whack. It's the sign of the cross. God, Jesus, us. Others, Jesus in the middle, us. We're always going through God for all these, or Jesus for all of these relationships that are there. And so when you read again Revelation chapter 2, verse number 13, what basically started to happen was, this is where Satan, it talks about the city where Satan has his throne. Okay? Again, in this place, they had Zeus sitting on the throne. That was their God. Worshiping him. Okay? And what did they do? They have forsaken Christ and began to start worshiping. Okay? There was an illustration of two boys that were discussing the way that the sun moves across the sky. One of the boys said, my father says that the sun doesn't really move. It's the earth that moves, and it just looks like the sun moves. Well, the other little boy thought about that for a minute, then he replied, I'm going to believe my eyes. So the first little boy quietly but confidently said, I'm going to believe my father. I don't know about you, but I'm going to believe my father, because my eyes can play tricks on me. And so we began to see these things. So listen, what was true for the church back then, ladies and gentlemen, is true for the church today. We're struggling. We're struggling. We've either got to learn to believe God or believe other people. I don't know about you, I'm believing God. And because I think he knows what he's talking about, okay? And what Jesus was trying to tell them when he was talking to John, writing to the letters of the 7 churches. Think about this for a minute. They had just started. Jesus went back, they believed, right around 30 AD, Okay, they believe he was born roughly around 3 AD or something like, or 3 BC in the recalculation of the calendar and all this other stuff. Okay, but let's not argue that point. Let's just say 30 to 33, okay? Make everybody happy. But in 37 years, every one of these churches are destroyed. You know what happened between the time that they were set up and the time that they were destroyed? They faced nothing but trials and persecution until 70 AD, when the Roman government came in and just tore down the temple and started persecuting the Christians. And they were persecuting the Christians even before then. Remember what Jesus had told them? He told them to go to the uttermost parts of the world. But what did they do? They stayed in Jerusalem. And so the Roman government came in and started persecuting and everything. And guess what they ended up doing? They started scattering and going, because it was no longer safe for them to stay there. They were going to die. And they started planting churches everywhere else. So you began to start seeing all of these things that were happening. And so in Matthew chapter 28, in verse number 19, remember what he said to them? He says, listen, and be sure of this, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. We use that verse in Scripture to understand that he's speaking to us, but he was also speaking to them, saying, you are going to see this happen, and I'm going to be with you during that period of tribulation. And let me say this to you. If Jesus was with them during that period of time, ladies and gentlemen, when they were being persecuted and put to death, then Jesus is still going to be with us today, and he is not forsaking us. He was there once, he's going to be there again and again and again. And so let me finish with this when we start talking about the appearance. It starts in Revelation chapter 1 in verse number 17. When you begin to look at Jesus, remember what John saw? Remember this. Remember Jesus in the flesh. And here's what John saw. He saw the Jesus with hands and feet. He saw Jesus with eyes of compassion. He saw Jesus speaking with a voice of hope. This is what he saw. That's the Jesus that he saw. But in Revelation chapter 1, verse 17, he's seeing Jesus through different eyes. Okay? You see, John saw the Jesus sandaled, tin-toed, and dirty. That's his image. But in Revelation chapter 1, verse 17, he's seeing Jesus, and look at what he sees. When I saw him, I fell at his feet like a dead man. He laid his right hand on me and said, don't be afraid. I am the first and the last. Because what did he see? You see, you and I, when we begin to read here, we only read about his eyes that are flashing, fiery, weeping. Not John. John had never seen Jesus this way. He had saw him totally different than the vision that he's seeing of Jesus right now. He said, when I turned, In verse 12 through 16, when I turned to see who was speaking to me, I saw the 7 gold lampstands, and standing in the middle of the lampstands was someone like the Son of Man. He was wearing a long robe with a gold sash across his chest. His head and his hair were white like wool, as white as snow. His hair was not white as snow when John saw him. His eyes were like flames of fire. His feet were polished bronze refined in a furnace. His voice thundered like a mighty ocean waves. He held 7 stars in his right hand. A sharp 2-edged sword came from his mouth, and his face was like the sun in all its brilliance. He was not describing Jesus. He was describing what Jesus is like. This is what he's like. He's not the one with the compassion and with dirty and in sandals. He's got an image that's showing you all of the characteristics of Jesus. Jesus is no more the one that says, I'm going to the cross to die. Jesus is now the one that is saying, I'm coming back to conquer and reign. You may have taken my life on the cross, but ladies and gentlemen, I'm coming back to establish my throne. You may have made me want to bow before you, trying to get me to bow. But I tell you, I bow before no man. But the Bible says that in that day, every knee shall bow and every tongue shall confess. And if you haven't done it now, you will do it. There will not be people standing before Jesus, ladies and gentlemen. They will be bowing and giving it up to the one. You begin to understand these images. Remember, if you were to try to paint this and say this is what Jesus looks like, no, what he was trying to describe to you was not what Jesus looked like, but what Jesus was like. He was trying to define what he was seeing there. He was the perfect priest. He had the sash across him. He was clad in priestly garments. He was the only plus one, so pure that even his hair was white as snow. The source of his strength, his limbs, they were burnished bronze. His voice of God, he was commanding as a river, sharper than a two-edged sword. The light of the world, besides which everything else pales in comparison to him. And what we need to understand is Jesus is not just this, but more than this. In fact, Jesus is so much more that you think about it. We measure our time by him. We date our letters by him. Our birth certificates, our checks, our everything is from the year of the birth of Jesus Christ. He is our beginning and our forever. And so when we look at this in the introduction to the book of Revelation, let me say this to you. It's all about Jesus. All about him. So we need to understand something, and that is this. In all of this, John says, when I saw him, I fell at his feet. Ladies and gentlemen, hear all of these things. When I get to heaven, I can't wait to meet my loved ones. I can't wait to talk the stories. I don't know if we're ever going to get up from bowing on our knees. I think we're going to be there a while. It may be for hundreds of thousands and millions of years that we are all still bowing. And the picture of heaven may be this: Jesus on the throne, and all the throne that has ever been saved through all of the ages is still bowing. And then let's get ready for the marriage supper. And let's go celebrate. Not just the coming of our King, but our groom, whose job is to take care of us for all eternity and to love us unconditionally with everything.